Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Ontario families are working harder, paying more and getting less. But this summer, Hydro One applied for yet another rate increase. Wow. A rate increase that could cost families, Ontario families, $141 more per year. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier promise to stop yet another rate hike?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to start by welcoming all members back to the legislature. I know how hard everyone works over the summer in their constituencies, and I want just to acknowledge that and to welcome everyone back to do this part of our job in the legislature. And Mr. Speaker, I know that the member opposite is very aware that people across the province saw a 25% reduction in their electricity bills this summer, Mr. Speaker. And he knows, as we do, that makes it much fairer for people across the province, particularly people in rural and remote areas who saw up to a 40 to 50% reduction, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that we are facing many challenges in this province, and we have a responsible and a fair plan to address those. The Fair Hydro Plan is part of that, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Three isn't working.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Premier a question about the proposed Hydro One rate hike, which is entirely in the government's power to stop. They've had 100+ ministerial directives where they've been able to interfere and meddle in the energy market in Ontario. Now there's a rate increase, $141, that Ontario families can't pay, and the Premier's saying nothing. The Premier's not going to stop it. So I will ask again, will the Premier do the right thing and stop this hydro rate hike?
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege of traveling the province this summer, and all over the province I was talking to folks and hearing from them about changes that we're making. Mr. Speaker, there are more than 180,000 young people in post-secondary today paying zero tuition because of the OSAP changes that we made, Mr. Speaker. We have people in this province who have seen $200, $300 reductions on their electricity bills, Mr. Speaker, because of our Fair Hydro Plan. Across the province, residents have seen at least a 25%, 23 to 25% reduction on their electricity bills, Mr. Speaker. So we recognize that there are challenges that people are confronting. That's exactly why we have a Fair Hydro Plan. That's exactly why we have reduced tuition and made it free for young people across the province, Mr. Speaker. Those are the results that we're.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, I asked a question about the hydro rate hike, and the Premier starts talking about tuition. Just for once, it would be nice if the Premier answered the serious concerns that Ontario families have. So here we have a $141 hydro rate hike at a time when the government promised relief. And what's unbelievable and disappointing is that at the time they're trying to grab more money for Hydro One's about to pay $6.7 billion for an American energy company, and the Avista CEO said this allows them to spread the cost burden out. Spread the cost burden out? Does that mean Ontario ratepayers would be subsidizing ratepayers in Washington and Montana? So maybe for a third time, maybe the Premier can say yes or no, is she going to block that hydro rate hike?
Thank you. You seated, please. You seated, please. Thank you. Start the clock. Premier.
So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition knows that people have seen reductions on their electricity bills. He also knows that rate hikes are being held at inflation for the next 4 years, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I guess I will. The member from Leeds Grenville will come to order. And the others.
Mr. Speaker, the Fair Hydro Plan put in place an average 25% reduction for people across the province, and for 4 years hold any increases at inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the Leader of the Opposition, who has not brought forward a plan in any way, Mr. Speaker, to deal with electricity prices, that this is a fair plan and it helps people across the province. Mr. Speaker, I would also say to the Leader of the Opposition that on top of that, we have got in place programs to help people who are living on low income, Mr. Speaker, and he knows that in northern and rural communities, people are seeing a 40 to 50% reduction, Mr. Speaker. That's making a difference.